Okay, everyone, we are back live with Matt MacDonald's presentation. Um, just so briefly, I'll introduce Matt. Matt works for Environment Canada out of their North Vancouver office. He's taught with the CAA for a long time and offers custom training across Western Canada. He's going to present on rivers in the sky. Matt, it's a bit dark where you are, but I can still make out that amazing handlebar mustache of yours. It must be growing well in the dark. We got no sound though.
There we go. I think someone just unmuted me.
There you go. It must have been the mustache getting in the way. Okay, over to you, Matt.
All right. Thanks everyone for hanging out here this morning. Never easy being the last presenter. Hopefully you guys got up for a stretch there and a little break. And before I get started, I just want to give a big kudos to the CAA for pulling this off. I've seen a little bit of all the work that's been going on behind the scenes, and I'm pretty impressed to see how smoothly this has all been going. So yeah, always an excellent opportunity to speak to all you professionals out there in the Avalanche world. And despite not being in Penticton this year, yeah, I'm happy to be here and chatting with all you folks. So yeah, my presentation today is about rivers in the sky. Over the past few years, the term atmospheric rivers is becoming more and more popular. And so we had a couple of them this winter that were quite interesting. And in speaking with some associates and colleagues, I thought I'd dive into one storm in particular here. So just part of my motivation for this presentation, in my role as a warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, we're trying to keep an eye on kind of the horizon on what's coming down the pipe in the kind of 4 to 6 day period. And the week leading up to Christmas, I remember coming into the office on Monday, December 16th, and looking at the models and being like, oh boy, this is quite the juicy storm lining up here. And all the models were in relatively good agreement. And this was 5-7 days out, which is always easier for us a little bit when the models are agreeing as opposed to disagreeing. And so, the question then becomes, how do we convey the severity of such a big storm, 5 to 6 days out, with inevitably, some uncertainty with exactly how it's going to evolve and how it's going to shape out. But, again, trying to get that message out there to stakeholders, Ministry of Transportation, avalanche forecasters, the media, that, hey, there's a big one coming up here. And then trying to, encourage stakeholders and decision makers to start thinking proactively. Given that you have 4 or 5 days lead time, what are some of the measures we can put into place to minimize impacts? And I'll wrap up with, what did we learn from this, and where are we headed? So just a general overview here of what I'll talk about in the next 20 minutes. We'll cover, atmospheric 101. What are those things all about? We'll dive into the what I'm calling the solstice AR, the solstice atmospheric river, happened around December 20th, 21st. And then I'll leave you with some atmospheric river forecasting tools, because there's a lot of great stuff out there, and I'll share some resources. And then of course there'll be questions at the end. All right, so just starting from the top here, basically atmospheric rivers, commonly referred to as pineapple expresses historically, and pineapple expresses kind of draw their name from the fact that they originate from the tropics, so they're quite warm, packing a lot of moisture. And anytime these vapor plumes originate from kind of Hawaii, we give them those pineapple expresses. But these things happen all around the world. Again, drawing moisture and heat from the tropics and delivering them to the mid-latitudes where we live in these very confined kind of fire hose type patterns. So Pineapple Express is basically an atmospheric river, just very specific to the Northeastern Pacific. As I said, they're very kind of narrow bands, and oftentimes the trick is trying to figure out, okay, where exactly is that fire hose going to take aim? And it's transporting water vapor, so just precipitation in the atmosphere. Geographically, they're typically less than 1,000 kilometers wide, oftentimes, 300 to 500 kilometers wide, but you do get these kind of fat ARs. And then in terms of length, they're anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 kilometers long. So quite the monster. They're pretty easy to pick out on satellite imagery and models. The two key ingredients with these ARs are moisture. So you need a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere, but you need also a delivery mechanism. So how is that moisture going to make its way from the tropics all the way to our doorstep in Western Canada? And so typically these things deliver really heavy precip. I think of the AR that happened at the end of January this year. We saw 500 millimeters of rain on the west side of Vancouver Island in just 2 days. So just south of Tofino there was a weather station that picked up 500 millimeters. It's kind of mind-blowing. And inevitably, because this moisture and heat is coming from the tropics, it's always associated with rising freezing levels. And depending again on the intensity and the duration of these ARs, freezing levels can go up to 1,500 to 2,000 meters, or sometimes upwards of 3,000, 3,500 meters in the middle of winter. And so with all that precip and warmth, not surprisingly, we're seeing landslides, floods, and oftentimes fatal avalanche cycles. And when we talk about atmospheric rivers in the science literature, basically the way we describe their intensity is in terms of IVT, or integrated vapor transport. So that's a lot of jargon, but basically we're measuring how much moisture is in the atmosphere and how much that moisture is being thrown at you in kilograms per meters per second. So speed and moisture coming at you. All right, so there you have it, a kind of a 101 on ARs. So let's rewind here to the beginning of winter. And here's the snow basin water index from the BC River Forecast Center. And it just kind of paints a picture around the province there of, where do the snowpacks sit right now compared to historical averages. So the shades of red there are showing a pretty bleak beginning to the winter. Being here on the coast, I know I was kind of nervous about how the rest of the winter would play out, having dropped in on a season's pass, and it's like, ooh, this is really not looking too good. And a lot of the reason for that was this kind of blocking ridge of high pressure that was parked over the northeastern Pacific. And what that did is it steered any incoming moisture up and around that ridge to the north coast and then down into kind of the Rockies. So you'll see that, the Rockies, the North Rockies, right through the central and down into the Columbias there, they actually had a great start to the winter. So for the World Cup Lake Louise, they're off to a good start. So definitely a bleak start, but then a couple of ARs later, boom, January 1st, this is what the new basin snow index looked like. And you can see, a huge jump from, 20%. We're now at 60, 70% on the south coast. And then the interior locations, they went from 90% up to 100, 120%. So I think this is a good example of how limited use a seasonal forecast would be, because there's no way we could have told you the snowpack is going to double, even triple within a 3-week period, as much as I'd love to be able to do that. So just an example here from the webcam up at the Roundhouse at Whistler. Again, beginning of November, it was looking pretty high and dry, and then a couple major storms came through, and it was winter, party time. So yeah, in those 3 weeks period, there's 3 atmospheric rivers. Here's the first one, the one that I'm calling the solstice AR. You'll note the shades of yellow and orange there are depicting 15 to 20 millimeters per 3-hour period. So yeah, we're talking heavy precip here. There's number 2 on New Year's Eve. Notice the parent low there over Haida Gwaii a little bit deeper, and so that was the driving mechanism to throw all that moisture at the coast. So again, you're seeing pretty heavy precip amounts up and down the coast, Vancouver Island into Washington State, and the annotated rising freezing levels up to 2,500 meters. And then if that wasn't enough, January 3rd, a third atmospheric river in 10-day period with, again, heavy precip, rising freezing levels. I think you guys are getting the picture. So for us at the weather office, it was a pretty busy period. We typically look to Christmas for a bit of a break. But the operational forecasters at my office, who, kudos to them, work 24/7, 365 days a year, were earning their keep, to say the least. Lots of warnings going out one after the other. So yeah, let's take a look at how the models did. And so again, I remember coming into work on Monday, and you're kind of self-briefing after the weekend. You've been off for a couple of days, and I load up a couple of products, and here's one that I look at. This is generated by one of my colleagues, Ruping Mo. He's a bit of or really our resident expert when it comes to atmospheric rivers. And so this is what we call a deterministic forecast. So you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket. You're looking at one model. So when you hear deterministic, that's what that means. And in this case, we're looking at the Canadian global model. So the GEM global, or sometimes also called the GDPS. And you'll notice a scale on the bottom there is that integrated water vapor transport. So in kilograms per meter second. And usually, I get a little bit excited when I'm seeing some blue and green. And then when we start to see the yellow, like getting into 750 kilograms, you're like, oh yeah, that's got some juice, it's got some potency to it. So this was Monday, 4.5 days out for the Friday storm. So models are already painting a pretty clear signal there that an AR is going to line up somewhere over the Pacific Northwest. And it was meandering north and south, like it went as far north as, the southern tip of Vancouver Island, and it did go as far south as the northern reaches of California, but we were pretty confident it was going to fall somewhere in between. So then, as most people do, is you do what we call a poor man ensemble. So you'll go and look at other deterministic models. And so here's the GFS, the American model, and it too was painting a pretty clear signal for a major AR. You'll notice the similar shades there, yellows and orange, getting up in that 750 kilogram range. So yeah, two models kind of painting a picture. It's like, okay, we're probably in for a good one here. And then, this is what it ended up looking like on the satellite imagery. So a beautiful shot here of the northeastern Pacific from NOAA. And again, you can see how long this plume is, right? You'll notice Hawaii down here at the head of the arrow, and then just that continuous moisture feed. So yeah, just, kind of biblical proportions of precip coming at the West Coast. So every day, actually, through the winter period, forecasters at Environment Canada brief Avalanche Canada forecasters, doing a webinar and a conference call, kind of like we're doing right now. And every Monday, I write, my colleague and I, Bobby and I, write a day 5/7 forecast, and that's to give Avalanche Canada and anyone else who reads our mountain weather forecast kind of a heads up of what's coming down the pipe next weekend, so you can hopefully start planning, maybe adjusting your staffing or your resources. For Avalanche Canada, they're thinking often of SPAWs, the special avalanche warning. So I provide kind of an ensemble, if you will, or probabilistic discussion of the weather expected for next weekend. And right from that point, given what the models were saying, we were pretty confident that, I was calling it a juicy end to the week with, an atmospheric river over the North Cascades, plume of tropical moisture taking aim at Washington and Oregon. And then, I was pretty conservative. It's always easier to step up with these things than kind of rewind, because if you say you're going to get a meteor of snow 5 days out, people get fixated on that. So I was like, let's start small, but in hindsight, I should have maybe given a range here, but we were talking about Allison Pass and Coquihalla getting at least 30 mils of water equivalent. And given the strong southwest flow, that would carry over into the interior ranges as well. And then inevitably the freezing levels would be on the rise. So kind of happy to say, 5 days out, we're all like, okay, yeah, this thing's coming. And then day of the storm, that story continued. The signal was still very clear. We were saying that this AR was going to be an exceptionally strong one. And I like the description there, fire hose of moisture, focused directly at Washington and Oregon states. And so southern BC was finding itself just on the northern fringe of the fire hose, and that was kind of good for two reasons. Number one, that kept the freezing levels down. So had that axis of the AR shifted even 50 kilometers further north, our freezing levels would have been at 2,500 meters instead of 1,500 meters. And the other reason it's good is that by being pretty close to the core of the precip, there's something called diabatic cooling or evaporative cooling. So as the precipitation intensifies, it actually cools the atmosphere and brings down the freezing levels. So while the models were kind of suggesting, freezing levels of upwards of 1,500 to 1,700 meters, because of that heavy, heavy precip, the freezing level is brought down to about 1,400 meters. And so places like Coquihalla Summit and Allison Pass at around 1,400 meters stayed as snow the entire event, which was pretty incredible. And then, yeah, here's, just for those of you who are frequent visitors to the mountain weather forecast, you usually see this image on the first page. And so there's that, that strong southwest flow again with those pretty colorful precip amounts. In this case, this is 12-hour precip, and the peachy colors there are 50 to 75 mils per 12-hour period. So giddy up. And then down at the surface, this is again how this frontal system was playing out. So just kind of a stalled, cold front draped across northern Washington, southern BC. And then you'll notice that secondary bullseye over kind of the Kootenays, which is pretty typical in a strong southwest flow. So again, internally at Environment Canada, our jobs as warning preparedness meteorologists, some of you may have seen these before. We call them weather notifications. So we send these out to anyone like an emergency manager, decision maker, again, transportation officials, just to kind of try and give them an early heads up as possible, 3 to 5 days in advance, that hey, there's something serious coming. And then you'll notice we actually have a range there in the alert levels. So we were calling this one significant. Those are based on anticipated impacts and return periods. So yeah, we're trying to tell people that something juicy is coming. And so I've just highlighted some words here that were kind of the key take home. So yeah, we're anticipating hazardous driving conditions, and we sometimes get some feedback from Drive BC saying you're not allowed saying that the driving is going to be bad. And it's like, well, meter of snow in 24 hours. I don't care how good your snowplows are. Some of the key points that very strong and moist frontal systems taking aim at southern BC. I mean, you guys can read this, in excess of 50 centimeters. And again, we're not telling the public at this point that we're going to be getting 50 centimeters because the media is going to make a circus of this. But for educated, responsible decision makers, we feel like we can share these, the kind of high end of the anticipated snowfall amounts in this case. At Environment Canada, we're not just trying to help avalanche forecasters. We're also trying to help, public authorities. So we're thinking of, loads on structures and impacts to SkyTrain and, all sorts of various clients from BC Ferries to, rail and transportation and whatnot. So yeah, you'll notice some other impact statements in there. And then the forecast certainty is something that I really appreciate being able to express as a meteorologist, because we all know that some forecasts are really easy and straightforward, and I'm ready to bet the farm on it, and others are a lot more difficult. And for this one, I would say it was medium forecast confidence or certainty, given that again there was such good agreement from the models. And so in working with Avalanche Canada, our forecasters were briefing their forecasters, and I think in this scenario, it's pretty easy. I mean, it was 3 times high. They came into the morning on Friday, and so, we issue the warnings and everything, and then we're all waiting, okay, is this thing gonna work out? And then it's like, yeah, sweet, 60 centis, and it's still nuking on the Coke and Allison Pass. And I quite like this little graphic that they tweeted out, just showing that atmospheric river. And it wasn't just a coastal event, it was really going to affect, right through the Columbias and into the Rockies. So avalanche danger was on the rise. And then just some alerts coming off of Drive BC and BC Transportation there. Anytime I load up Drive BC interface and I see a red banner, it's game's on. And I think to all you people who are, earning their keep. And I couldn't help, you'll notice the date on when these came out, and they're December 20th. So it's the day of the storm. And I wish we could get into more proactive messaging, without, and it's always a fine balance between, ringing the alarm and crying wolf, because if the storm doesn't materialize, then it's quite embarrassing. But 2-3 days even. I'd love it if we could get into the tendency of encouraging travelers that, hey, major storm coming up this weekend, maybe you want to try and travel on Thursday or postpone your travel till Monday. But Friday, Saturday is probably not going to be the best thing. So just planting that seed early on so that people have time. And I equate this to the hurricane warnings where a hurricane warning gets issued 4 or 5 days in advance. So you're not running around with your hair on fire. You're, hey, we got time. We can go do groceries. We can put the boards on the windows. We can prepare. We've got 4 or 5 days lead time. And I would draw an analogy here to these atmospheric river type storms. So here's the beast on the satellite imagery. You'll notice that parent low off of Haida Gwaii. And that's really it was helping drive the delivery of that moisture onto the southwest coast of BC and northern Washington there. So it's always nice when you have that image in your head of what the models are projecting, and then you see it live, and you're like, sweet, the models did a really good job. So again, yeah, we come into the office, the next morning and kind of a sleepless night wondering, did we cry wolf? Is this thing really going to materialize? And so at 10 a.m. that morning, we're looking through all the observations, like sweet 70 centimeters on the Coke and Allison Pass. And yeah, you can read the amounts there, but as you move yourself east, non-surprisingly, there's a bit of a delay as you get further east across the province, but there's also, that coastal range is pretty effective at wringing out the moisture. So amounts further inland were a bit less, but there were some impressive amounts, for Rogers Pass and Cooney Pass as well by the end of the storm. And so in speaking with Paul Harwood there, he's the program lead for the North Cascades program with Ministry of Transportation. And he was able to confirm that indeed it was a new all-time record with records going back to the mid-70s. Allison Pass picked up 107 centimeters in 24 hours. So it was nuking. I mean, it was amazing. We were watching the webcams at work, and none of the cars were moving because the highways were shut for mostly MVAs, multiple vehicle accidents, and you're just watching the snow accumulate on the roofs within minutes. And Paul shared this photo here. That's actually an avalanche in the light there next to that truck. So not stopped in the best place, but again, Paul shared also they were fortunate in that because it was early season and we hadn't seen much snow, none of the slide paths were filled in. So that was a bit of a saving grace with this. There were slides coming down, but they weren't going full path and getting onto the road. So most of the headaches from this storm came from just road conditions and vehicle accidents. So I'll come back here to kind of how the long range guidance did. And, I've already kind of let the cat out of the bag. I think they did really well. Again, these deterministic forecasts, GFS, it's actually gotten worse in the last couple of years. They did a major update last year, and something that no national weather agency ever wants to do is you actually made the model worse. So the Americans have been working really hard to fix what they broke. And then our global, our Canadian global model, which is beaten the American model for the last year, did also a really great job. So those are deterministic model forecasts, and always caution people to look at individual models because it's like putting all your eggs in one basket. But if we look at the ensemble forecast, so this is from kind of a partnership with Canada, the States, and Mexico. It's called the North American Ensemble Forecast System. So in this case, you're actually looking at a whole mixture of 42 different models, and you're looking at the ensemble mean, so the average of all these models, but you're also looking at the spread. So when all 42 models are kind of converging on a solution, again, that increases our confidence and so on. Whereas when there's a huge spread and it's like, ooh, or sometimes what we call a bimodal solution. So there's either it's going to be really bad or it's not going to be anything at all. And yeah, that's a hard one to deal with. But in this case, again, the NAIFS, as we call it, was painting a pretty wet signal. So this is a total 48-hour precipitation forecast by the NAIFS. And those hues of pink and purple are, suggesting upwards of 100 millimeters of water equivalent in 48 hours. And then you'll notice the gray there down in Oregon, that was like 120, 140 mils. So yeah, quite the storm. So, the storm blows through, and again, we had the two other storms that came after, and that one stuck with me because I couldn't help but feel this frustration of, and we knew it was coming. And you just, as a public servant who's trying to get people prepared, it was like, well, why did we have to have all these accidents? Why did, I think there was a death even, why did that have to happen? And I remember being on CBC radio for what ended up being a half-hour interview on Friday afternoon, and they have me on as like the weather expert, and then there's this other guy who's the travel expert, and he's all kind of, proud to say that, oh yeah, with travel you just have to be flexible, and there's no such thing as bad weather. You just have to adapt. And he's telling CBC and a million listeners in Greater Vancouver that he's got two kids, 2 and 6 years old, which are the exact same age as my kids. That yeah, they're going to Sun Peaks because they've got a place booked there, and they're not going to back down because there's $600 rental on the line. And I'm just like, I'm biting my lip on live air, thinking, you idiot. Like, you're like, fine, expose yourself, but like, to drag your kids through the storm of the decade over the Coquihalla, like, and by the end of the show, he gets a text from his buddy, and they're like, oh no, they shut the highway. And so he's finally like, oh yeah, I guess we're not going to go, only because they had shut the highway. Otherwise, he was going to go for it. So, you know, again, I don't want to point the finger here, but it was just a good experience to be like, okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board. And, is there anything we could have done better, to give people a heads up? And so in our organization at Environment and Climate Change Canada, we're trying to be more proactive as opposed to reactive. It's not like you come into work and load up the radar and you're like, oh my God, look at this monster. It's like, okay, let's try and get out, 3, 4, 5 days ahead of this thing, and try and start collaborating and messaging. And we try and help our partner agencies, be it, again, the Ministry of Transportation, or Emergency Management British Columbia, or whomever wants to talk to us, to start thinking a little bit more proactively. And I totally appreciate the challenge of when it's already busy and you see the signal like 3, 4, 5 days out. You're like, yeah, okay, I know that's coming, but we're so busy right now. I know internally at Environment Canada, we're trying to make an effort to like, okay, let's pull one of the team members out of the mix and tell him to turn off his email and everything else that's going on, and just focus on that day 5 storm, and try and start preparing and thinking about how we're going to message that. For agencies who have the opportunity for strategic planning, like, there's some sleepless nights coming up. So if you have that luxury of maybe pulling some of your staff off the line and saying, hey, go and sleep, go rest up, get some mental health in check, because we've got a major doozy coming down the pipe, that might be something you might be thinking about. In terms of equipment, be it explosive inventory, or tuning up your snow plows, or making sure you have enough salt, or maybe you're pushing back the snowbanks, or if you're at a ski resort, maybe you're checking your boundary lines and raising the ropes because the snow is going to come up, stuff like that, right? And starting to think again 3, 4, 5 days out. A lot of with snowstorms, at least, a lot of the success or challenges comes from how efficient will the highway maintenance contractors be. And without getting into it, I know the Ministry of Transportation here in BC, they get their forecasts from an American entity, but I think they're always looking at our forecasts as well, and it can become a bit of a pissing match. But yeah, I think again, as long as everyone's present and kind of tuned in at what's coming, and hopefully starting to think a little more proactively about what's coming, usually that'll minimize impacts, hopefully. And then we've been working with the social media people at Drive BC to try and collaborate. And, other than us retweeting them and them retweeting us, sometimes we're now trying to get some like messaging that we both agree on, so that we're not kind of, pointing a finger at the maintenance contractors. We're just saying, hey, meter snow in 36 hours is probably not going to be good, despite what kind of technology. I don't care how good your winter tires are or how good your snow plows are, it's not going to be nice. So yeah. So before I leave you guys here and open it up to questions, I know I'm running a little bit behind. With climate change, I just thought I'd show this great video animation, and to avoid technical issues, I'll just kind of describe here. So, this is your atmospheric river. You've got your precip, and you've got your delivery mechanism. And so historically, these things have been about about 4,000 kilometers long and anywhere from 300 to 700 kilometers wide. And so there's been a number of studies because these things have such huge impacts, and not just in Western Canada, but California. Like, I'm kind of painting AR and ARs in a negative picture here, but really there's a ton of great benefit that comes from these. They top up water reservoirs. We get more than half of our annual drinking water supply from AR, so we need them to continue. But it's been shown that as climate continues to change, they're actually probably going to get a little bit chubbier and a little bit longer. So these things aren't going away anytime soon. But I think we're really fortunate with the development of numerical weather prediction that we're getting better at forecasting them, and that folks like yourselves can prepare a little bit better here. One last slide, and this is kind of death by PowerPoint here. I don't expect you guys to read everything that's on the screen, but we've been working at Environment Canada with people like Matthias Jacob. So he's a principal geoscientist at BGC Engineering, and he's been doing a lot of work on trying to classify these atmospheric rivers. So similar to the hurricane scale, when we tell you, hey, this is going to be an AR4, that kind of resonates with people. It's like, oh, whoa, that's like 4 on a 5-level scale. And so, the return periods and anticipated flooding and, geographical extent. So this is something, in hindsight, looking at that solstice AR, it would have been almost a 3 to put that into perspective. And then if you guys remember the atmospheric river we had at the end of January, first day of February, that one was an AR3, like full blown. Like, we had 4 deaths on the island, catastrophic flooding. That road up to Sasquatch Resort completely wiped out. So yeah, I think we're gonna be utilizing this AR scale a lot more. It still needs some tweaks. This is version 5, and those in the States have a similar product. But yeah, look for this. We'll be kind of talking like, and I'm hoping that one day it'll get into the media and be like, oh, they've got a AR2 coming or an AR3 coming. So yeah, before I open it up to questions here, a couple resources. Top left, Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. Try and say that 4 times. But if you Google CW3E, as they call it, they're out of San Diego there, Scripps Institute of Oceanography, doing a ton of phenomenal work with some really easy to understand images. Like, even if you're not super technical, just they've got some nice, shiny imagery on their website anytime there's an AR coming down the pipe. We're going to continue doing our best to writing the mountain weather forecast and kind of giving people like yourselves a heads up of atmospheric rivers. Again, on Monday and Tuesdays, we always produce the Day 5-7 content only once a week. And then I'd encourage you to take a look at some ensemble models. So I think 2 of the best around, publicly accessible, are the NAIFS, that North American Ensemble Forecast System, and then the good old European model, the ECMWF. So yeah, just before I wrap up, I'd like to give a shout out to Ruping Mo, who's our resident atmospheric river expert here at Environment Canada. And then Paul Harwood was also a great source of information and sounding board. I was testing this deck on him last night at about 9 p.m. And finally, yeah, huge kudos to the CAA for pulling this off. So yeah, thanks guys.
Great. Oh, thanks, Matt. I'm going to tell you the very first thing. You have an icon like this. Press it if you want to ask Matt a question. Questions in the window won't be easy to provide to Matt. So with that said, Brent, do we have any questions for Matt off the bat?
We currently have no questions on the floor.
Oh, I think Brad Acker has come through for us.
Brad has pulled through again. Brad Acker.
Hello there again from Idaho. Thanks for the talk. What sort of frequency has there been, the increase in atmospheric rivers in like the last decade?
Yeah, there's that's hard for me to answer. There's a paper that's going to be published in the near future. I believe it's being co-authored by researchers at UBC on the frequency of atmospheric rivers and the change as we head forward in time. And typically we see anywhere from like 10 to 20 of these every winter, and we always have. It's just that we started calling them atmospheric rivers. These things have been around as long as humans have. But there is a pretty clear signal that, you know, they're changing, for better or worse, because when these ARs start tracking further north, that's what leaves California high and dry and are, you know, desperate for water. And then all they need is one or two of these storms, and it seems as though it's either feast or famine. I often point to other research that shows a lot more blocking patterns. So we get these really stagnant and blocking ridges of high pressure, like we've had here in the Pacific Northwest through April, super dry month. And then boom, you know, the floodgates open and we get one or two or three of these ARs back to back, and it's like too much in too little time. So yeah, if you shoot me an email, I'd be happy to point you to some scientific papers there that are going to be describing, yeah, the change of atmospheric rivers with climate change.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. My gosh, all our questions are from the States. The Americans are going to think we're all shy ponies. Do we have any other questions?
We have no more questions from the floor, Joe.
Okay, well, that wraps up our last presentation today. Matt, thank you for putting all of this work into this presentation today. It was greatly appreciated. Thanks to all of our other presenters. Just a quick note that we peaked out at approximately 349 participants today. That's great. Thank you very much. Tomorrow we will start again at 8:30 a.m. The link that you used today is the same link, but members of the CAA, please know that the link that you need to use for the AGM is different, and please make sure that you have that one saved as well. We'll see you again at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you very much for attending today, and thanks again to all of our presenters. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.